So it is. I have 6 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order pursuant Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, hereby informing all attendees that a video and audio recording is being made of the meeting. First up, first agenda, we do public comment. Is there anything? Kathy?
I just have 2 things to report for the Lee Youth Commission. We have 2 exciting things happening on December 7th. That's a Saturday. And one goes well weather-wise and so forth and so on. We will be setting up the ice skating rink here at the athletic field. And we will need volunteers. So if anybody's up and about at 9 o'clock in the morning, December 9th, and we'll put together that rink in no time. Is the obstacle course. We're at the, I have to read off of here, Westway Tower Gym. It's the our second Saturday gym night that the Lee Youth Commission is sponsoring. And this is obstacle course racing, and there's all kinds of things happening there. And it's at 5:30 at night to 7 at night for ages 5 to 10. Older students are certainly welcome to come and they help out. And usually the parents do stay and they participate. It's a lot of fun. So,
Those are the 9th, on the 9th.
yes.
Saturday. Yep. You
They,
said the 7th at first, so 7th. I know that date. Okay, we're gonna jump up the order a little bit. We're gonna go right into master plan.
Mr. Chairman, I want to introduce CJ Haas. CJ is a manager at the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, and he has been support for a master plan committee for about the last year. He's a former city planner in Pittsfield and has a great deal of experience. And his role on this for us has been to record the comments, to make suggestions, and basically to be the draftsman of our plan. And we've in many cases, or in a few cases at least, I think we've reached at least an interim final approval stage. In others, we're still fairly early in the discussion. But there are, how many sections are there, CJ? About 10?
Yes, in the end, there will be about 8 to 10 overall topic areas.
And housing and land use are 2 of the big ones. Housing has been approved on an interim basis until we get to the final draft. So it's pretty far along from the point of view of the master plan committee. Land use is sort of in the middle of the discussions. We've seen a couple of drafts, but we haven't really approved any final draft. But CJ suggested, and I thought it was a good idea, that because this planning board will be seeing the final product and taking action on it, and because so many of the things in these 2 sections that you have before you refer to things that the planning board would be asking itself to do in the future, we both thought it would be a good idea, even on this preliminary basis, to present this to you and see what comments you have. And I'll now turn it over to CJ to explain about the housing implementation plan and the land use implementation plan. CJ?
Thank you, Peter. I think this is also great timing because I would say in the next day or two, the district local technical assistance for 2024, sort of like public relations will go out just to announce that we'll be seeking applications. And it's a program that Berkshire Regional, it's a grant program that is made possible through state funding every year that BRPC administers, and it allows us to take on smaller scale projects for all of our municipalities. And the applications will be due later in January. But just to give you an idea, a number of the actions that we'll talk about tonight are things that we could even potentially help out with through our district local technical assistance program. If there's something that you feel really passionate about and would like to line up to do at some point in calendar 24 with our assistance. So with that being said, I will, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen if that, don't worry about it. You have these charts in front of you, so I'm not going to go ahead and share my screen. So generally with land use, as Peter said, I would say this is typically the chapter of a master plan that the planning board is most invested in. The planning board is the gatekeeper for the master plan, but many of the sections, it's really up to select board or town meeting or other municipal bodies to carry on to ensure progress is made. But when it comes to land use and housing sections and some other areas of the document, this is really up the planning board's alley. So I would say they're probably the ones that you'll spend the most time on moving forward. So as far as the land use implementation goes, the overall goal that was developed for the section, at least in the draft form it's in now, is to ensure that land use decisions balance quality of life, social and economic needs, and improving the quality of the environment. So generally how these master plan sections are set up is there's an overarching goal, and in some cases multiple goals, objectives under those goals. So for example, objective 1 in this section is shift land use regulatory policy to one that is focused on the types of projects and uses that the town wishes to encourage versus traditional zoning. And then under that objective are specific actions. So generally what that objective means, in case you're struggling with that, which you very well could be, is, most of our zoning, whether we're talking about the town of Lee or we're talking about, just about any other community in the Berkshires, I mean, most of our base zoning bylaws were developed in the 60s and 70s. And we're really focused on segregating uses because of concern of essentially, more noxious industrial or commercial uses mixing with residential uses. Over the last 20 years or so, planning trends have tried to shift back to really allowing land use patterns that were prevalent, 100 plus years ago, that were more mixed use, didn't rely on automobiles as much, and were generally places where you could do where you could live, have some like smaller scale community services and retail, as well as other community services, and potentially do it all without, from one place, one village, one hamlet. So that's really what this is speaking to, is trying to base your decisions and your regulatory frameworks, your zoning, around encouraging more specifically what the town wants. And generally what we see is in land use, there's more predictable outcomes, whether you're a small business, a property owner, or a developer, in trying to understand what the town wants and what the town's willing to approve, when you're trying to shape that to specifically speak to what the town wants versus what the town doesn't want, which is a lot of, again, that 60s, 70s era zoning really speaks to. So I'm not necessarily going to go through every action, but we suggest 5 actions as well. So what you'll see also, there's some actions highlighted as new. So in the last discussion that the master plan committee meeting had on this section, there were a few different actions that came up, and they aren't in final form of how I was going to present them to the master plan committee, but I thought they were things that you might be interested in or hearing more about. So I wanted to include them in this in some form, and that's where you see those highlighted actions that are sort of referenced as new action at the end. So this set one actually has 6 actions, but these are very basic things like just developing permitting guidance tools to assist business and property owners of what to expect when they enter town hall, and whether they want to pull a building permit or they need a special permit, what that process looks like. Potentially evaluating the use of form-based codes. A form-based code is It's an alternative to traditional zoning that more communities seem to be picking up, where it's really a focus on the form and placement of buildings versus uses that are specifically allowable or prohibited on a given parcel. But it's more focused on trying to encourage development that fits into the neighborhood character and being more concerned about seeing that happen versus the use itself. So that's a tool that there seems to be interest in pursuing, and one that I definitely recommend, the planning board would look into at some point. And there are a number of other actions. I'll stop there though, just if there are any specific actions under this objective that you've had a chance to look at, if you have questions on. I think it's also worth highlighting the purpose of this is if you have specific thoughts on any of these actions, it's a great time to hear about them. Or if you specifically notice anything that you feel has been missed in either of these sections, again, it's a great time to talk more about that and see if we can address it now versus when you see this plan, in early 2024.
So are we going to rewrite our zoning?
So
Are we gonna? It's pretty close.
Do you want to? I think that. I mean, I think
You know,
go
it's
ahead.
50 years old. It's 60. Actually, yeah, it's over 50 years old. It's gonna have to be tweaked.
So I think, I'm not sure what I think about this myself, Buck, but I think it's here. I'm glad that it's here because CJ seems to be aware of alternatives that have been developed in the last 50 years since I wasn't paying attention anymore to land use questions. And I just think this idea of form-based codes is an intriguing one that we should look into. I don't know if it's in the end what we're going to want, because anytime you change zoning, there's turmoil. There are people who are unhappy with any change you make.
I know a couple of them, their heads will literally explode. They will explode.
CJ, could you say a little more about form-based zoning, which is 1.1.3? This isn't that the developer comes in and fills out a form and then they get approved, right? It's the form of the, right? It's the building, that's the form.
There's really one. So I would say in Western Massachusetts, and I'm not just counting the Berkshires, but I'm counting Pioneer Valley. There's really not many communities have taken it this far, and I think it's largely because most of our communities are relatively rural. And if they have planning staff, they don't necessarily have much planning staff and a lot of capacity to see this through. And that's probably why you see more of this happening in Eastern Massachusetts and in other parts of the country where there's just generally more capacity to take on projects that are a little bit outside the norm. So specifically, the one Berkshire example that has been able to do this, it's Pittsfield, and it's some work I did in Pittsfield before I left the city. And I'm not trying to compare your community to Pittsfield, but you do have a relatively dense downtown area compared to many Berkshire municipalities. So what we did in Pittsfield was we essentially took a look at what we thought the downtown area really was. And we gutted the existing zoning, the existing 1970s era zoning, along with an overlay district that allowed some mixed use flexibility to actually legalize, that mixed use pattern that was there in the downtown area. We ripped it all out, and the approach we took was specifically, what are the types of projects we want to see in our downtown area? And up to that point in my 10 years working in Pittsfield, I would say 95% of the special permits we issued in the downtown area were slam dunk projects that there was no community concern about, that were clearly fits for the types of, whether it was development, just adaptive reuse of buildings, or new businesses, things that were clearly fits for our downtown area. And when you're working, especially, whether there are people from within the community or outside, dealing with zoning and special permits can be viewed as very daunting. And people coming from outside the Berkshires, like generally, I would say for many of our communities are relatively business friendly compared to what you see in Eastern Massachusetts and other areas of the country. And a lot of developers see our zoning, don't really understand how to navigate our processes, or that most of our communities really would like to work with developers in some degree. And that's not like I don't mean across the board. Obviously, there's projects that are good fits and bad fits for the town of Lee. But the zoning was not clear on what it was the community really wanted. So that was the approach we took. We made it very easy for a developer, a property owner to seek approval for specific businesses. So there's still a use table within the downtown form-based code we created. But it was more focused on what do the buildings look like and do they fit into the context of the surrounding buildings? And that is, we essentially went through this process where we focused on where parking was going to be located, maximum setbacks instead of minimum setbacks, so that buildings couldn't be set back far from the street, and not matching up to the street. Like you have a core, you have a stretch in your downtown area where there are buildings built, there are probably 0 lot line buildings that are built up to the frontage. Really just ensuring that new buildings matched if there were new buildings, and that adaptive reuse projects could be made more easily to move forward without so many hoops to jump through. We still made it difficult for certain types of projects that we did not feel were fits for the downtown area, and where we expressly prohibited projects like fast food, restaurants with drive-throughs. So you can still expressly prohibit projects, but we made it much more clear about what the community was looking for. And I think for your downtown area, maybe it's not a fit for the entire town. I could see that being a tool that might benefit in the long term, the town of Lee, for example.
Would you, that could lead to expanding mixed use into what is now strictly residential, you think?
It could be. So one of the things we did was, on North Street in Pittsfield, there was a lot of concern about storefronts being taken up by essentially dead spaces, even if they were occupied, uses where they were covering up windows and basically just creating a street environment that was just not really, there wasn't a fit for what we were trying to create. So we expressly we didn't have to, but we prohibited certain types of uses in first floor spaces, encourage especially offices, residences to be located above on second and third floors. That's not necessarily what you would have to do, but those were some of the things we were trying to do. And that was just North Street. On other streets, side streets, there was not as much concern about that, and you added in additional flexibility. It's not necessarily a zone that's a one size fits all. It's probably something where you have, you define what you think your downtown is. You might have multiple sub-districts that have different regulations depending on the sub-district. But the point is you're creating something that it's almost street by street. It's trying to encourage, whether it's infill development or whatever it is, but something that is enhancing the neighborhood character versus detracting from it.
Peg, you have a question?
Thank you. 1.4.5.
Yeah. You're way ahead.
I'm way ahead. Okay, I'll save it then.
Okay.
Any smaller communities done stuff like this yet? CJ, we could look at.
Let me look into that, and I will follow up with you on that. That's actually a really good question that I do not have an answer to. I know the 1 or 2 Western Mass examples I can think of are not. It would be more. They are larger communities, so I could go looking for that. But even if it's not in Massachusetts, I know there is interest in smaller communities elsewhere. So I can find some examples for you and point you towards that.
And even if it was Eastern Mass, I mean, that's if it's a smaller community,
It might be better. but-
at least you should, that might be very helpful.
Yeah,
I know you're speaking to like Pittsfield's North Street, which is more of an urban station. Is that what we have here?
Our Main Street is 1-2 blocks of North Street, very similar. I mean, we have commercial on first floor. I'll get right after I'm done,
No,
Peg,
I'm
okay?
sorry.
Okay, and then we have, apartments upstairs, so it's very similar. Okay, Peg?
Well, having gone down North Street many times, I think it's wonderful that you promoted the bicycles. But I also feel from the point of driving, it's a little bit different. And some of those storefronts must have lost parking on one side of the street quite a bit, right? Am I correct or no?
I will answer that question, but just before I do that, this has nothing to do with bike lanes or how you use the public right of way. This is simply development on private property. We are not getting into public realm improvements or not to say that couldn't be something that even the master plan gets into, but I don't think it'd even have that much detail in the end. But so I just wanted to say that first, that just to be clear, and that's why I'm even hesitant to talk about Pittsfield as an example. It's the one local example I could point to that you are likely aware of. And really, it has nothing to do with how the public right of way gets used. This is simply about how private space, whether it's the buildings or landscaping or other types of improvements on private property, how they happen.
Well, I will say I did know people that moved off of North Street because of activities they felt were harmful to their business. And I don't want to get into anything, but
That's a whole different,
I know it
that's
is.
totally,
I
it's
know
not
it is.
zoning, it's just an
Well,
issue in the city.
yeah, so therefore, I would also concur with Conrad. I'd like to see some small towns that have done this, even if they're not in the Berkshires, that we could at least reference it to. Because I think it would be, Pittsfield is declared a city. We're declared a small town by population. And I do think we want to do what we don't give time here every second or whatever night we meet. We want to be fair to the town of Lee and get something that's awesome for our town.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest if we're done with the part one, we move on to the second objective, which
Yep.
is promote the preservation of existing residential neighborhoods.
So it's not.
So quick, Dan.
Just a quick question. So, and I started on the planning board back in September, but what does the town of Lee want? And what is the best fit for the community? Or is that what we're trying to?
That's what we're trying to find out.
So has the town said anything as far as, hey?
Master plan's coming out. That's what we're working on.
Well, I mean, the master plan is going to be a suggestion to this board and to other town officers on a variety of things. And some of those suggestions will be quite specific. Look into this or get a plan about that and get it done within 2 years. Some of those will be quite specific. Of course, the people that we were making the recommendations to are free to completely disregard it, put the plan in a drawer and leave it alone. But it still would be a recommendation that this citizens group that's been working for a year has made. Some of the recommendations will be quite a bit less specific, like they were in this one we just talked about. It's not saying that Lee should have form-based zoning. It's saying this is worth the planning board spending some time looking at. And so I think what we're trying to do here is to persuade the other town officials that we've got good advice here and that they ought to, in good conscience, want to follow. If we fail, if we don't have good advice, then they'll ignore it. Does that answer your question, Dan?
Yes.
By the way, it's going to be quite comprehensive. I mean, we have outside, what is it, outdoor,
Open space and recreation plan.
I can never remember that, open space and recreation plan. That's going to be a whole other chapter. There's going to be a chapter on transportation, which we didn't present to you tonight because it's not really done. But there'll be questions about Main Street and parking and truck traffic. And, I'm not sure where the committee is going to wind up. And of course, it's all going to be submitted here. And it means nothing on the day it arrives here, except as advice from a citizens committee. It doesn't become the master plan until this board adopts it. So we'll make changes here, no doubt dozens of changes to whatever the committee comes up with, but it'll be a quite detailed document with multiple parts. And these are just two tonight that we're presenting to you.
And so some of the things on this document, so being part of the board and your work over the last year, which we appreciate, you've been taking a pulse of the town, seeing what the town wants, right?
As best we can, yeah. I mean, we had a big public forum last February. We had over 80 people come, spend a good part of Saturday with us. We broke out into, I think, 5 different groups, and we had people take notes, and we reviewed the notes of what people said they wanted. We did an online survey of what people said they wanted. So we did all that work early on, coming up on a year ago now. But in the last few months, we've been debating what we think ought to be in this kind of sheet, based upon our own personal experience and on what we heard.
And I think it's also worth referencing, we've also been doing public engagement in a few different ways, and some of it's stakeholder meetings, not necessarily public meetings, but stakeholder meetings through a few different projects, one of which is, as Peter referenced, the open space and recreation plan that has had its own one public meeting, and I believe one more public meeting to come, or we may include that as part of the master plan, but there's more public engagement to come on the master plan side. We've also been working with the select board on the reuse of the 300 Stockbridge Road site, which has gotten a lot of, actually a lot of stakeholder feedback this year. And we've also been doing some work around hazard mitigation. So, there's this specific work going on, but there's a few different planning projects going on that we've gotten a lot of good feedback on. So I think it's worth referencing that. The other thing I'll just briefly say about the form-based code recommendation that as it's been presented is, while the last decade, I've worked and I live in Pittsfield, I've lived most of my life in a rural community smaller than Lee. When I was a planning consultant before I worked for Pittsfield, a lot of my master planning work was working with rural communities. And this is a recommendation that in today's planning world, I would be making to them as well. So I will go look for some specific examples for you to look at, but I just want to let you know that while I'm using Pittsfield as an example, I have, over my career, I've worked and lived in, rural communities as well. So I do have a good point of reference on this. I just thought it was worth saying that out loud.
You, CJ. Now, we're moving on to the next objective.
Yeah, I think that the thing here that's sort of somewhat between the lines is that our existing zoning was, as has been said, it was designed primarily to segregate what we saw as incompatible uses, primarily things that would be incompatible with the residences. And I think to some extent, the committee's view now is that having as CJ referenced it, an older form of residential settlement where you have more mixed uses, where people can walk to the stores and there isn't so much reliance on getting into the car and driving down to town, would be something that we think would be beneficial to the town. And that's sort of written into L 1.2. CJ, do you want to talk about 1.2?
Yeah, and we talk, obviously we have a housing section that has even more specific actions, but given, we didn't want to let this section go without talking to some degree about residential growth. But even going back, I think the other thing that we should have referenced off the start is when we started developing actions, we did go back and look at what the town said it was going to do in 2000 as part of that master plan effort. And a lot of the concerns the town had at the time are still we're still very relevant. So you see that even if we've reworded them, there's a number of actions that are, that were concerns over 20 years ago as well. And especially in relation to this one, there was a concern at the time about more and more residential sprawl happening, because in the previous 20 to 30 years, it was more parcels that were divided as like Form A's, approval not required plans, and just more larger lot development, and getting away from maybe the historic development pattern in town. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but this is certainly something that carries over now when you talk about preservation of land, preservation of open space, whether it's for agricultural use, trying to avoid lands that development that affects wetlands and other natural resources and things of that nature, and also not stressing the town's budget and utilities by connections to development that's generally low density, and creating roadways and water and sewer utilities that the town will have to maintain, that are generally of a density that you may not want to encourage at this point because of the cost. So a lot of this is really speaking to trying to encourage development in and around existing settlement patterns versus and really trying to avoid residential sprawl.
Sounds good. Keep on going.
So
Okay.
1.3 is a little bit of an odd duck, I think. Ensure that non-residential areas in town maintain flexibility to allow for growth in existing businesses, while also considering the possibilities of adaptive reuse potential. And really, I think what we have here is a couple of things that were carried forward from the last plan. There was a concern in the 2000 plan about Lennoxdale, and we weren't sure what the history of that was. What was the particular problem in Lennox, not Lennoxdale itself, which is part of Lennox, but the Lennoxdale proximate area within Lee, by that bridge that goes into Lennoxdale. We weren't sure what concerns there were in 2000. So we didn't delete it, but we didn't really have anybody advocating for it. Some of you may know something about this, and CJ has colored it in. And one of the things that comes up again and again is what to do about the mills. And people want to see it used for housing. They want to see it used for parks. They want to see it used for industrial development. They want to see it used for housing. So 1.3.3 is a general asking really of this board to try to figure that out. We haven't figured it out, which it ought to be, but giving this board the task of not just drifting, but trying to address it affirmatively. CJ, you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, 131, it was worded differently in the last version that the master plan committee spent a bit of time talking about. So that was my attempt to clean it up and try to make it clear. The interesting thing one of the many interesting things that the town of Lee has is that you essentially have this, whatever you want to call it, village-like center, with the small settlement area of settlement right over your border in Lennox, but where the town has land and a mill that could really be viewed as part of Lennoxdale, and where typically you're trying to discourage development around a town's outer edges, just as a way to discourage sprawl. You have this opportunity where, well, maybe you don't, this could be an area where you do want to encourage development, because while it's over the border in Lennox, you do have this town center that exists that could, development could benefit it and also benefit the town of Lee. So that was something where I'm not sure the master plan committee is sold on that, and it's going to be taken up again. I'm sure there'll be more discussion on that, but that was my first attempt to try to clean that up and provide some additional direction to where that discussion was going and what the thought process might be to highlight that in the plan.
Property though is owned by Lennox, right? The old mill there in
Mhm.
Lennoxdale.
It-
That is owned by Lennox.
Niagara? Yep.
Niagara is in Lennox.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is,
And
but
they did, no, I'm not saying it's not a bad idea.
it's such a, close to Lennox that we could utilize their village while promoting, development on our.
I sort of
Side of it.
understand it as, let's do some joint planning. with
Yeah.
Lennox.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
we
what I
could both
originally,
benefit
oh, go ahead, sorry.
See if we could both benefit from working together.
You see so many people walking back and forth through there.
Yeah, through Golden Hill, a lot of people do walk down through
Mm.
Lennoxdale. I know that because I have friends up there that do that. But it is their property, so therefore, I mean, I don't say we shouldn't work together, but
Right, but Sunshine, this side is all
Um,
ours.
yes. Um,
But we don't work
But-
jointly together well. That's all I can
The other thing is, there was, at one time, just for history, they were gonna put a cannabis thing in Lennoxdale, in that mill. Remember this? Anybody? Probably not. I was teaching at the time in Lennox, and boy, people in Lennoxdale did not want it, and they came out in droves, against it. I'm just saying that, it is, I understand what you're saying, because a lot of people work in one town and benefits the other, and, working together is a good thing if you can. But it is their property, that's all. Thank you.
So if that's it, we'll move on to 1.4, manage growth in undeveloped areas of town to avoid unnecessary sprawl, conserve open space, and protect sensitive environmental resources. And CJ, this has 5 actions, but I think you've already addressed this as a objective. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or CJ, you want to say
Can I-
anything?
Oh, go ahead. I was wondering about one. Go ahead. I mean,
No,
you're-
I was saying anything that can avoid me talking, feel free to go ahead. Sorry. Good.
just want to make sure I'm on the right page now. L 1.4.5, the action.
Yes.
Is there any historical funds and other funding sources to preserve agricultural and forested open space? How about historic significant buildings?
Are you asking whether CPA funds can be used for other things also, or are you
Yes.
asking?
Well, I know they can be. if
Yeah.
it's correct.
Right.
Done correctly, but
So,
I'm wondering about this as well.
so you're asking whether agricultural and forested space can be supported by other things than CPA funds?
Yes,
Sure,
things that
sure.
are
they can.
historically significant.
Or,
Oh,
well,
I think she wants
No.
CPA funds used for historical sites.
okay.
Historical sites, or somehow, something of that nature, because in the old,
Do we address, oh, I'm
no, go
sorry.
ahead.
Do we address that elsewhere, CJ?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
his-
So one of the other sections which we did not provide you is historic and cultural resources. So we talk more specifically about that there. The reason this focuses in on agriculture and, well, really just for land preservation is just because the objective is more about managing growth in undeveloped areas. So that's why this one specifically speaks to agriculture and forested lands.
Okay, and the next one, if I may, 1.5, the land use pattern and design of the town's gateways, the town's appearance, making it more welcoming to residents. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I can. So
Okay.
we designate ourselves or call ourselves the gateway to the Berkshires.
Right,
And there's been a lot of discussion about what that gateway looks like.
right.
And not everybody is happy with the way it looks.
Right.
We've had mention, we have one member of the committee who is quite interested in billboards, whom you may
Oh, yes.
guess who that might be. But he's not drawing any traction on that, I assure you. But it turns out that there's a lot to be said about how things look down there. Are there enough trees? What do the buildings look like? What is the first impression that people get when they get off the Mass Pike and come down? Is it a pile of asphalt that's 20 feet high that the state highway people have put there to do some resurfacing? So there are some opportunities, we thought, to tweak this a little bit and try and make it a little bit more something that we would all be proud of.
Good, thank you.
I think that's it, CJ, for the land use section. You want to say any
Great.
more about?
No,
Uh,
oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say, if any of you have anything after you've had some time to think about it that you feel we haven't addressed, feel free to pass that on to Peter, because there's certainly more time to think about other items.
Want to go on, Mr. Chairman, into the housing section?
I would love to, if CJ's okay with us tonight.
Oh, no.
You
this is
got the
great.
time?
Hey.
I have the time.
Sure.
I tend to talk too much, so I apologize for that.
You're on, well, the housing is in the packet in front of the one we were just doing.
Yes.
One right
So
here.
It's the third sheet in the packet.
coming back to H1.
H1, yeah. And so this is farther along in our deliberations. I think, this is semi-final in the sense that we've taken a vote on it. We're going to not discuss it again unless something emergency happens until we get to the very end when we're considering the whole document, and then it'll be open again for amendment by the committee. I want to begin by saying that a great deal of our discussion has focused on the need for housing. And you don't have to be, an expert to know about Lee to know that there's a general housing problem in the whole Northeast and perhaps even nationwide, except for, parts of the Midwest. Housing has gotten very expensive and it's very difficult. Many, many people will say things like, my kids graduated from college, but they can't afford to move back into town because they can't find a house they can afford or an apartment. And so we thought that making more housing available is very important and is a central concept in what we're trying to accomplish. Both in terms of, if we can, cheaper single family housing, but also what people call affordable housing, which tends to be housing for low income people. But even in my view, equally important, or perhaps even more so, is sort of mid-range housing, rental housing, where people who work in the stores and who work in the, in the nearby industries can work at a job and afford to live in the town near where they work. And we think that will require changing some policies about how rental units and multifamily housing are handled under existing zoning. CJ, do you want to do an intro on this?
Yeah, I'll be more brief with this, but I think generally overall we try to address. There's really focusing on the objectives of this section. It's one, how can your local government, how can it help support housing development? Making sure that the town has a pulse on how housing needs are changing or evolving, so that things are done to adapt as needed. A number of land use regulations that facilitate specific actions that facilitate housing goals, and then a focus on creating housing for low-income households, but also increasing the availability of what you'd consider more market rate, which is generally, non-subsidized housing development. So that was really this is probably going to be the second largest section when it comes to specific actions. And we've tried to keep this succinct, but recognizing that there are a number of things that the town can and should be doing if it wants to support all these objectives.
To go through them one objective at a time like we did before?
I'd love, yeah.
Okay. So the first goal is to promote diversity in housing choices to ensure that the housing stock serves all residents, including single persons, young families, low-income households, and moderate-income households. And the first action we have here is recommending that Lee do something that Great Barrington has done, in my opinion, speaking now as an individual, to great effect. I mean, Great Barrington has a housing trust that has a very good handle on what the housing situation is. They work very closely with organizations that construct market rate and affordable housing, and they get a lot of housing built down there. And it's something that we should look at. It's a little bit different than just having another board, because a trust would be an independent legal entity that would be able to raise funds from governments, from grants, but also from private contributions. And it would operate somewhat independently of town control. It would not be, decisions would be made by a board of trustees and not by the voters at town meeting. But the potentiality for having something like this is that you'll have somebody paying much closer attention to what's going on, or in our case, not going on with housing development. Questions about that? The second one is monitor and address changing housing needs over the long term. And you see that in the fourth column, you see that this board is listed, but second to the Affordable Housing Trust, which would be primarily responsible for keeping track of housing changes. Questions about that? Third one is review land use regulation and facilitate housing goals. And the first couple of things we have here are the things that we're doing anyway. The accessory dwelling unit construction and short-term rentals is listed over near the right, is underway. But there are other things like allowing 3-family residential uses more as right than as a special permit. My sense of it is that our existing zoning looked at multifamily housing as a very dangerous thing that needed to be controlled very severely. And I think we should probably change our view on that. I don't want to throw it overboard entirely, but again, speaking as an individual, I think we can relax it quite a bit and maybe get some more housing built without any real harm.
And the density in there, I mean, it's not, you do a townhouse and you can put, 5, 6, 7 in there without a big impact.
Yeah.
And you have much, then you take what would be a maybe a duplex,
Yeah.
or even a 4, you got 8. It's great.
Yeah, I remember, Buck, you and I were on the board together one time when the guy who owned the church up on High Street,
Exactly.
he came in and he wanted to put some housing in the back.
Yep.
And they were going to be small units, but they were going to be rentals, as I recall. And we just told him he couldn't do it. They just too many units, it's prohibited by zoning. And I thought, I walked by there a lot and I thought about that every time I go by. I'm like, well, would that really have been bad for the neighborhood? No, I think it would have been good for the neighborhood to have some kids around and, a few more families. So anyway.
Okay, hold on. Gordon's got a question. Go ahead, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just on your first point that you were talking about, the Community Development Corporation in Great Barrington spearheads a lot of their housing areas, whereas in Lee, the bylaws of the Community Development Corporation is specifically earmarked for industrial development. They are currently in discussions about changing their bylaws, and you may wish to reach out to the CDC so that they can come in and talk to you about changing their bylaw and their focus, since we're not getting a lot of industrial issues going on anymore. And they may be able to be that separate entity, Peter, that you were talking about. That is a quasi, governmental, but yet kind of on their own. They used to get a lot of grants from the state and from the federal government. So you may want to discuss this issue about changing their focus to residential so that they can act more like the Great Barrington CDC and take more an approach of working on housing issues. That's all. And as a member over there, I'm the select board member, I just thought that it would make sense to give you guys an update on what they're thinking about.
Great. Now, doesn't Great Barrington also have a housing trust with Fred Clark as the chair?
They may. I don't know about that, but I know their community development CDC group is really focused on housing, more so than commercial, industrial. And that's why the current CDC in Lee is considering a change to their bylaws, which they'll be voting on probably in December or January. And they may be able to really help out in getting grants and whatnot, because I agree we need more housing. And I hope you guys eventually get to our bylaws where it restricts and handcuffs the Board of Selectmen in their special permitting process to very limited number of units within any structure. So anyway, that's all. I just wanted to give you the heads up about the CDC, and I think it might be a good idea for you guys to reach out to one or two of their representatives and have them come in and talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. That's a good idea, and I think we'll do it. So we will do it. Okay, so that's 1.3. 1.4 is increase housing availability for low-income households. Here we have another CPA reference, Peg, in 1.4.1. I mentioned you because you're our CPA representative. So we're trying to find other ways, many ways as we can, to encourage the construction of more housing. And H1.5 is increase the availability of market rate rentals. And this includes 1.5.2, which I think is a little bit of a reach, but I'm responsible for suggesting this. We haven't approved very many permits for new housing. And I think the board, in the time that I've served on it, sees itself primarily as a kind of a quasi-judicial board that when somebody brings us an application, we act on it. We either approve it or disapprove it, or well, hardly ever disapprove it, but you often condition it. But we wait for people to bring things to us. And what this is sort of implying is that if nobody brings us anything, we ought to be out snooping around looking for some things and trying to see if we can add somehow by hook or by crook 10 rental units a year, which is about the current level of, maybe even above the current level of total building permits in Lee. So it's a reach if it stays in like this, it would be expecting some increase in building activity of a specific kind. And it would also be a reach in the sense that it would be asking this board to take on a responsibility to be more proactive about going out and planning some housing that gets built.
Gordon, do you still have your hand up, or is that a new hand?
Sorry, I'll take my hand down. Sorry about that.
No problem. Wouldn't want to miss you.
Comment on that? I saw some furrowed brows, but.
Well, we have some housing in town. I mean, Buck knows the one I'm talking about. It's on East Street.
Mm-hmm.
The old apartment house that's been sitting vacant for years.
Yep.
There's at least 5 units in it right now. Probably could be made into more. And there's enough area to build 2 or 3 more new units if you can make it feasible.
Well, I think that would fall right under 144.
Yeah.
Encourage, yeah, definitely.
Well, just something. And then
If there-
that one
even
comes
if-
to the top of my head as soon as we started talking about it.
Some acres of land there too.
But another thing while I'm talking, it seems like the planning board, they brought up for most issues here.
Yeah,
I like the idea, when you talked about in the beginning of your discussion about having the meeting at the town meeting where we started off with
Yeah.
that worked out very well.
Last February.
But see if we can have, once the master plan is accepted in place, then see if we can bring in some information from outside towns and try to get a group, offering a time that we could bring the town together to discuss the new master plan
Yeah.
and what the townspeople feel are the major issues that we should go to immediately.
Dave, I did want to bring that up before we quit on this tonight. I think that's exactly the right thing. Except there's a question in my mind as to how the best way is to do it. I have told people several times over the last year that the master plan committee will hold another public hearing with a draft plan for consideration before we submit to the planning board. But what are you guys going to want to do once you get it? Probably you're going to want to hold a public hearing, right? So maybe we should figure out one public hearing, not two. And you should advise us if you want to, whether sort of we should do it finishing up our process or whether we should do it as like a public handover to the planning board, sort of like a joint meeting with the public where the master plan committee says, this is it, we're done, and here's what we voted. Here you are, planning board, and the members of the public are out here and they've seen it and we've advertised it and they're gonna tell you what they think of our product. And we're not gonna change it anymore, it's now gonna be up to you. So that would be the second way to do it. And as I think about it lately, I think the second way is probably better.
That might be,
Yeah.
but boy, I fear us,
I don't know.
I fear us just gutting it
Well, we
The
haven't got
planning board
enough
running it?
time
Well,
Yeah,
for us.
by public comment
Oh,
would be a shame.
well, the public, I mean, you'll do what you think is good for the town. In the
See,
end, it's your
that's-
vote.
But the public doesn't always do what,
See,
they
that's
think
where I
is good
started
for
off.
the
I said
town.
we would okay the master plan. And then we go to a meeting, the master plan's cast in stone. And then we go to a meeting and ask the townspeople what they feel that we should address in an orderly fashion, first, second, whatever. Because everything that's on this paper, most of it has planning board.
Yes, it
Mhm.
is.
We could never cover all this ground.
That's right.
Even with a planner, even with a
No, I
staff planner.
agree. Overwhelming.
I think a staff planner is gonna really help
Yeah.
get us on track here.
Hey, though, Peter, I thought that meeting did go very, very well.
Did.
People were really, I felt at that public meeting.
Yeah.
People were really happy. I mean, I heard a lot of people that were very pleased with it. They were pleased with how it was done.
They were engaged.
And they were
Oh, yeah.
engaged and a lot of good things came out of that meeting. I mean, I recognized some things that I personally had never thought about and thought, geez, that's a good idea. So,
Well, let's just put it this way. My advice to my master plan committee is going to be if the planning board doesn't want to do something jointly,
oh,
we as a master plan committee should try to have a concluding public hearing on a draft master plan before we submit to the planning board. So that's back to plan one.
okay.
Plan two would be we hold a joint hearing or we hold a meeting where, there's an official, we have the carriage and Cinderella gets out of the carriage and hands you the document. And then to be accompanied by public applause or boos, whatever the case may be. And then you get to think about it. But I can do it either way.
I don't know.
I do feel committed to holding another meeting with the public.
You've been saying that.
Been saying that, yeah.
I hate the thoughts of having all your work torpedoed.
Oh, that's that's
I mean, you
public.
could be
that's
starting
public-
all over again.
That's public service. No, we won't start over again. Not with me, we won't start over again.
All we would have to do
To be present.
Well, oh, yeah, sure. And you could just come and watch. And if it's a
That's it.
disaster, you could say, hands off. See ya.
Yeah, they did
Go
it.
back, Peter, go do it again.
No, we're not doing this again.
No,
This is
no,
just,
no.
I mean,
But
our
wasn't anything like, I mean, I've read through it. It's nothing like this. I mean, this has actual action, goals, objectives, actions. You know, the other one was just a
Statement.
Yeah, a statement,
A
yeah.
statement.
let's just
Yeah.
keep being in favor of this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah. Well,
This
one
is
of the
something.
decisions we made early on was we wanted
I don't know.
things to be, the actions to be measurable and time related. So that at some point in the future, somebody could say, now it's 2026 and let's see how much of this has been done. And they can come to you and say, gee, we're really glad you did the first half of this, but the second half, what about that, you guys? So you'll be committing yourselves to future work if you adopt this. But that was what we wanted to happen.
these sections are looking really good.
So the town planner though, that's on the docket and that's good to go.
I think it's in the works right now.
It's in the works. Because a lot of this says town planner,
Yeah.
which,
Right,
Mhm.
right.
I can only assume the other 6 section are, this is
Yeah.
gonna be a large.
The town planner,
possibility.
if the town planner is not approved by the spring town meeting, which is when they'll get to decide this, if it's taken out of the budget, then all of these dates would have to change. You'd have to sequence it much longer, over a much longer period, once you figure out what your staffing level is. Or, you can hire CJ and his people to staff us on a contract basis instead of on an employee basis. So, but those would be the choices, employees, contractors, or a longer term. Are we done?
I think we are.
I think it's
CJ,
wonderful.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Anything else from you?
No, thank you all and have a great evening.
Okay,
All right, thanks, CJ.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate the time.
see you on the next meeting.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Doubling back, we had split zones. And I think we had something pretty much finalized that we could send over to Jeremiah, right? Was the plan?
The only comment I've had on this is from Dan, and the last line on the page, he questioned the word usual. And I asked him if he wanted me to take it out, and he wouldn't tell me. So I just pointed out that it may be unnecessary, the word usual. And it probably, for us, sort of cognoscenti, we know what usual means, but for somebody reading it cold, it probably doesn't make any sense. So
We-
I kind
delete usual.
Delete usual, do we have to,
Five findings required for special.
do we
permit.
have to define what those, or I mean, reference the findings better?
Oh, it is.
Oh, yeah,
It
yeah.
is
we
listed
are.
right
Okay,
there.
yeah, got it. Yeah, just
I
get
would
rid of
take out
usual.
usual.
Yeah. So we'll, send this over to Jeremiah, see if it's enough
Sure.
change
Sure.
from our original. I think,
I move that we refer it to town's general counsel to give us an opinion as to whether second proposal can be raised under the state law, which might block it as a reconsideration of a failed motion or a failed proposal.
It's on the split zone, not necessarily the setback issue.
correct.
Right.
Setback issue, we're sure that's gonna go.
Yeah, let's do the split zone first.
So my motion is to refer to town council for opinion about whether it's allowable to.
Significant change from
to,
original.
Bring this on the grounds that it's a significant change from that which was defeated.
I'll second that if it's a
Second.
motion, Peter.
Okay, round the table. Peter,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Peg,
Aye.
Conrad,
Aye.
Buck Donovan, aye. Brooke, you follow what we're doing there? Because last town meeting, it got voted down, and now we're gonna see if we can do it.
And Brooke, you have the document, I think, so you can just delete the word usual, and then send it on to Jeremiah, to the lawyer.
Probably send them the original one too, from last spring.
Just from him.
January 1st?
Yeah, I was gonna say, can we put a date that we would request it by end of year? And then that'd give us plenty time, set a public hearing and get it in spring.
Sense?
Dan, you're pondering. You're good? You look like you're
She's
Coming
gonna
up.
have to change the words around. Brooke,
What do you mean, change what words?
reading the 5 required findings.
Just take out the word.
Need to just take the usual.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
As far as you,
No, I'm good.
okay. How about reduce setback for RV zone?
is what we talked about, right?
Mhm.
Yep,
Okay. with that.
75 to 40. We want to set a special a public hearing on this yet?
Yeah, so why don't we set a public hearing in January after we've
Yeah.
heard from council? So
Okay, we'll set
first
both of
meeting in
them then.
January, yeah, assuming that he will, well, even if he says the second one can't go, we still would want to do the first one, wouldn't we?
Mhm.
Yeah. So we advertise them both?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's legal until it isn't.
And we'll just drop it if he says it's not. Okay, Brooks, so on your other tasks, we're gonna need a public hearing for that RV zone change and split zone. Oh, Jesus. Really,
I know,
we're
January.
second and fourth, right? Yeah, so it'd be the 8th. For January 8th.
Motion for that? Yeah. Oh, I move that.
Okay.
We schedule a public hearing on January 8th at 6:15 PM for these two proposals.
I'll second.
What time?
Dave's,
6:15?
any further discussion? Hearing none. Peter,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Peg,
Aye.
Conrad,
Aye.
Buck Donovan, aye. All right. Moving on, discussion upcoming town meeting. We got it for the 6th. Let's look over just some bullet points. I mean, I'll do the ADU if there's no objection. I think bullet points on how the purpose was pretty good, how Peter had it. What an asset he is, by the way, everyone. How we do any of this stuff. So they actually have short-term rentals first.
Yeah, these were supposed to come in order. I don't remember which was going to be.
Right, so
They were
short-term
gonna-
rental
yeah.
was first.
Okay.
I think there may be a page missing in mine.
The ADUs.
Yeah, I think I get the same thing.
I think there's a page missing here.
Yeah.
Article 2, we go to Article 6.
Oh, that's okay, but we want Article 7 and 8, I think.
Well, there's,
The beginning of Article 8 is missing, I think. We got a ADU we jumped from short-term rentals into ADU without a heading.
True.
So,
So anyway, I would say touch on the housing issue we have.
Mhm.
The ability for larger properties and to have a detached, it may actually make it legal to have I'm gonna really stress, it'll be actually legal to have a detached garage with an apartment above it.
right.
We have a lot of them around town that are illegal, but this would be legal. Yeah.
So I think the order was that if the STR goes first,
Yeah.
and if that gets enacted, then we have a definition of STR, which we can refer to in the ADU bylaw.
That's why we're doing that one.
That's why we're doing it in that order.
Oh,
So
who wants to take that one?
I'll do that. I think the very long piece that I wrote a 2 or 3 page piece on this. It compared other towns, what the other towns had and didn't have. And I think that was in the warning for the public. I think that's out there. So I don't know whether I'll just summarize that or,
Oh, Gordon?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just checked and the town meeting warrant has the short-term rental prior to the ADU. Just so you know, that's what's officially posted, just so I give you the heads up.
That's gonna work well because there's
Yeah.
in the ADU, we reference the short-term rental bylaw, so
Yes.
that'll work out best. We'll know that it passed or failed.
Yeah, and then in Article 9, you deal with some other definitions in case short-term rental failed. So,
Yep.
yep, but it is posted that way around town.
Perfect. That'll work.
and Gordon, they put that long write-up I did has been sent around to town, hasn't it? On the short-term rentals?
I don't know, Peter, what do you mean? Do you mean like in a document mailed or just on the website?
I think it's on the website.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out how much to say at town meeting, whether I can cut it short because people have already read it, or whether I would, what I was thinking I would do would be to read the first part of it, which is like a page and a half, just sort of what we did and what we were trying to accomplish and what we decided. And then there was another page that was comparing it to Stockbridge and Great Barrington and Otis and other places. And I don't think I'll read that, but I was there for questions in case people, somebody said, well, what about Otis? At least I'd be prepared and have some chance of
You
answering.
can just say we looked at Otis, we looked at Lennox, we looked at other towns.
Yeah.
Sort of,
So
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Gordon.
No, just as a general rule of thumb, the way I look at things, the less said, the better. Everybody has a chance to read this stuff. If they have a question, they'll ask. If not, you give them a very brief synopsis, let them know the planning board voted whatever your vote was to recommend, and then answer questions. But if you get too deep into the woods, into the weeds, people get confused and it gets a little crazy. That's all. That was just a thought.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind, Gordon. Thank you.
Yeah, they have the warrant summary, I think, Peter, is where all that information went.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So if somebody's really interested in it, they'll read that.
they'll read that.
I'll
Yeah.
be very brief.
Because I noticed in your summary, you referenced the other towns. And if we go down that discussion, like Gordon said, it will be, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And then you just,
Yeah.
you can't at that moment, that you're not going to be able to. So,
Okay.
okay. We did master plan, Community Preservation Act,
I have very
Peg?
little, the applications are due Friday of this week, and then the interviews will start January, I believe, no, next Monday, oh my goodness, wow, Monday, and they're gonna start 6:15, no, 6, I forgot the time.
4:30.
Oh, sorry. All right, 4:30 to 7, so you'll hear more when that's over, or when
Now-
they decide.
Community Preservation Act is a CPA, right, Peg?
Right.
Okay. Number 3 in our town warrant. This article allows CPA funds to be used for the purchase and open space on Stockbridge Road. The purchase will connect 2 towns' properties, 300
Right.
Stockbridge Road and Lancome Park. We have updates from you every meeting, and it took the town warrant to hear anything about this.
Because they just voted on it. They
That-
just voted on it recently.
But
very
then in your
recently.
report, you still didn't mention any of it.
Well, I'm sorry.
It just blindsided all of us, or
Oh.
not here, but a
Well,
lot of people were asking what this was about. And I saw the CPA and it's like, boy,
well,
I really,
he-
I really
he,
should know about that.
Well, actually, you should, but they just voted on it and it took them quite a while to
Beautiful.
get their thoughts together and to even have a meeting.
Well, I mean, the warrant's been out there a while, so it wasn't
has.
Well, we
yesterday.
haven't met though.
So the CPA committee has supported this particular use of its funds
That's
already?
correct.
So there had to be a.
But no others?
Not at this time, as far as I know.
Okay. Right. And we have town meeting. Oh, Gordon, you got some more?
Yeah, no, Mr. Chairman, just, the Board of Selectmen was in negotiations for a long time on this issue, and then we took it to the CPA folks. They had a meeting, and deliberated and voted to, utilize their funds, and that's why the board put it on the warrant. Just so I mean, it has been in the background for quite some time because we were negotiating and the owners of the property left the country for a while on vacation. So it did take a while. However, it did go to the CPA for a posted meeting and a vote and discussion. And we talked about it at our meeting when we put it on the warrant. They're just giving you a heads up. Thank you.
That's what I found out
Thank
about
you.
it at your meeting. So,
Thank you, Gordon.
okay,
Can I ask him a question?
go ahead.
On the property in Stockbridge Road, Gordon,
Yes, sir.
the barn,
Yes.
is that already split into a legal lot?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a legal lot. It has no frontage. We're transferring property.
Is
There's
it
no,
it has no road frontage then?
it has absolutely zero, and we have not given any, there was a proposal to issue a right-of-way up the driveway, and we refused to do that. So any access will be basically by the frontage of the proposed buyer. And there is no road frontage that's being transferred.
Okay, so there would be no Form A to split this piece of property
There's
off.
always a Form A, but Form A means approval not required, A&R. So to be able to cut a piece of property and transfer it, you have to do that. It's just not a subdivision. It means that there's no subdivision of property. We can A&R this and go through the planning board through you guys. And it is not a separate lot, if that's what you're thinking, Dave. It is not a separate lot or a separate building lot. It is just going to be annexed to another property if it goes through. And that's that. There's no additional frontage being transferred. And because of the chapter in the general law that all this land is under, we can only do that. Well, we're doing this at this point to transfer 1.2 acres because we're adding 25 acres. You can't have a net loss when you're in conservation restriction. So we will not be having a net loss. So therefore, we can do this the way that it's laid out.
So
Thank you.
we'll be seeing a Form A, Gordon, to
And
transfer
yeah,
that barn.
if the town meeting approves this, then you'll see an A&R sign off. Prior to any kind of a sale, we need to do an A&R plan, have it filed so that it can be registered and transferred. But there again, you'll see an A&R, which is just a land transfer with no frontage.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, there's no, I'm looking at his, that parcel already and it's non-conforming frontage already.
No,
believe.
there is, I don't know what you're looking at, Mr. Chairman, but there's, it's, property owned by, I think Jeff Leprovo that's pre-existing to whatever. And, it's just a matter of extending his lot a little deeper by 1.2 acres. That's what it amounts to. There's no change in any frontage lines at all. And there's no
Right.
rights of travel over our existing access point.
Okay,
The new property lines are gonna be around the barn.
That's
You're-
correct. And just enough so that we're not creating any nonconformities for the barn.
Line setbacks.
Yes, we were aware of that, and the lines are drawn to make sure that there's no nonconformity
That's what I'm talking.
being created.
all there is.
Great idea.
Okay.
Yep.
Looks
Does
good.
that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yep, no, I'm good.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks, Gordon.
so let's see next. And hey, Gordon, while you're there, how'd you guys end up on a Wednesday night?
Availability of the facility.
Okay. Okay. That'll be a first. I don't think I've ever seen a town meeting or,
I agree, but the school's really busy this time of year with different plays and different activities in Shakespeare. We ran into Shakespeare and Company, a bunch of other things trying to plan this out. And it just worked out that this was the date that would work for the school and for the availability, so we jumped on it.
okay, good. Okay. Anything else? Anyone?
Peter, your date on your proposal was September 11th. So if you find those minutes, Brooke, that'll solve you searching.
Oh, great.
For your definitions in other towns. Yeah. On
Oh.
September 11th.
I'm sorry, what was September 11th?
When Beth had sent out the minutes, attached were your STRs, definitions, drafts, all
Oh.
sorts of stuff for the public hearing.
Okay,
So that was on September 11th.
Okay.
For that meeting. So Brooke has to go look and find it.
I see, got it.
What it looks
Great.
like. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Sure Beth will help you too. Yeah. The hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or written one. I mean, I read them sort of in the paper, but, okay. I think we're all through the agenda.
Somebody probably wants to make a motion to adjourn, I suppose.
Not
Oh,
a bad
want me to make
idea.
a motion? I'll make it. Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Aye.
Aye. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you,
You
everyone.
know, the meeting is around Christmas time.